The theme of this concluding fifth panel is Scientific Ecology and Assessing the Climate Challenge. Eradicating poverty and hunger in the world is the priority. And before I welcome the individual presenters to this podium, where I will introduce them individually, I would like to make just a few preliminary remarks to introduce the topic and the theme of this panel, because some tragically wrong economic policies are being pursued with a quasi-religious fanaticism in much of the transatlantic region. This is, number one, true for the endless bailouts of an unsustainable and inherently bankrupt financial system, but it is also and especially true for the policies, the so-called green policies, the policies of the great transformation of our energy and resource supply system. So in this panel, we will hear some very stark examples of where this is leading, particularly in the German energy and in the industrial sectors, and why it must be reversed. According to a new survey by FTI Anders Consulting, a large consulting company in Germany and worldwide, 36% of large German companies with more than 1,000 employees are intending to move production out of Germany, with 60% of these companies planning to move to Asia. So de-industrialization is in full swing. To tolerate this would be absolutely suicidal, so we must mobilize ourselves and more forces to choose a positive alternative. What I've just described is particularly hair-raising because the day after the survey of deindustrialization of the German companies was published, the 23rd meeting of the leaders of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the so-called SCO countries, took place. And the SCO represent 40% of the world's population, including China, India, Russia, Pakistan, and, as a new member, Iran. They have only one wish. They want to develop, they want to modernize, and they want to share the fruits of modernization and development equally among themselves. And they reject Western sanctions and interference into their interior policies. But there has been literally no mention and not one single word in the press about them, about the meeting of the SCO and their public statements, which would be of great interest to the Europeans. So the task falls into our laps to amplify and make visible the dynamism of the institutions of the Global South, like the BRICS Plus and the SCO, and to use it as a lever to break these insane green policies that are ruining our economies. With that said, I would like to bring up to the podium the first speaker will be on video, and this is Christian Lévêque, and he's an Emeritus Research Director at the Institut de Recherche pour le Développement, and a specialist in aquatic ecosystems. He's also the Honorary President of the Académie d'Agriculture and member of the Académie des Sciences d'Outre-mer, as d'Outre-mer overseas. The title of his speech is Biodiversity, Man.
Eh bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vais en quelques minutes essayer de vous expliquer pourquoi l'écologie scientifique est instrumentalisée à l'heure actuelle par la pensée magique. Nous avons, nous les Occidentaux, hérité...
Hello, good days to all of you. So I'm trying to explain to you in a few days, in a few words, in a few minutes, why scientific ecology is currently being instrumentalized by magical thinking. We Westerners have inherited from the religions of the book the idea that God created a perfect, harmonious, and balanced world. That's our theological heritage, which doesn't necessarily exist in other cultures, but which has become the mainstay of militant environmental movements, such as the major international conservation NGOs like the WWF, which are all Western-dominated. The main thrust of their message is that humans are destroying the magnificent, pristine wilderness bequeathed to us by God, and that in so doing we are jeopardizing the future of mankind. Hence, the idea that beautiful nature is nature without man. It's American wilderness or European naturalness. Beautiful nature is nature without man. Somewhere along the line, when we think of protected areas, we've protected them from man, to be precise. This is the big international business of nature protection, which is carried out by the big international companies in particular, and which I'd say has taken hold in quite a few tropical countries, particularly in Africa and in Asia. The idea is to identify areas in which populations are to be removed from their natural habitat in order to create unpopulated zones where nature can express itself freely. An interesting field of work is an interesting work in this field is the invention of green colonialism by Guillaume Blanc, a historian who showed how the WWF has acted in Africa to set up national parks. This NGO's policy is still on the agenda since at the COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity held in Montreal in 2022, 180 countries pledged to protect 30% of the planet by 2030. 30% of the planet is no mean feat, and it begs the question, if we do indeed protect 30%, even with reservations about whether or not local societies will participate in this protection, what are we going to do about the humans who will be excluded? After all, the whole point of these protected areas is to free nature from human exactions. Where does this idea come from, that nature is beautiful and generous, and only beautiful and generous? We don't often hear the argument that nature is hostile to humans, yet this is the daily reality for many of the world's citizens. This ideology of nature is based on a bucolic and metaphysical representation of nature that originated in urban and bourgeois circles in the 19th century in various European countries, according to which nature is a place of relaxation and recreational activities for bourgeois urban citizens. And to have the time. And let's be quite clear, nature is also represented in terms of classes. There's the class of wealthy, urban bourgeois, for whom nature is a place of relaxation, and there's the class of the working classes, the rural dwellers who at that time in the 19th century were mostly peasant farmers who had a different vision of the future. This vision has come to fruition and is now supported by the United Nations, which has decreed that there should be a Mother Earth Day every year, meaning that we are in fact returning to the Greek goddess of the earth, to the adoration of Gaia, the mother goddess, who is also called Pachamama in certain South American religions and practices. In a way, it's re-deifying nature in another form. The myth of the apocalypse is the one currently being promoted by these NGOs and by the media. According to them, nature is in danger and we are endangering it. Not only nature, but also the future of mankind because of overpopulation, because of the globalization of systems and the capitalist system, which is strongly attacked by political ecology because of the misuse of scientific innovations, as is the case, for example, when we talk about GMOs, when we talk about pesticides, and all this contributes to a destruction of nature. You often hear about it, the erosion of biodiversity, the disappearance of birds, the disappearance of insects. All this is ideology, which doesn't mean that humans don't have an impact on nature. The whole question is how to quantify this erosion and to make it global, get an overview on it. What I wanted to say earlier was that the rural people who have a daily relationship with nature, farmers who have a daily relationship with nature, they don't have the same bucolic vision as urban people who experience it, I'd say, as an intermediary. They are confronted, they have been confronted, they're still confronted with the question of dangerous animals, crop pests, diseases. In Africa, most diseases are parasitic diseases transmitted by living biological species. And then there are all the catastrophic hazards, floods, droughts, and so on, which mean that in the end, the life of a farmer, of someone who is in contact with nature, is quite uncertain. There used to be fatalism. We implored the Creator. We practiced rogations in Europe, for example. We implored the Creator to benefit from his clemency. In many religions, we also turn to gods and spirits for clemency in matters of agricultural production. The reality of ecology, which is never presented to us in this light, is that the myth of paradise, where everything is in harmony, is really a fantasy. In the real world of ecology, what we call food means that in order to live, each species needs to eat another species. In other words, to kill other species. In the living and ecological world, we're faced with the paradox that it's a veritable permanent holocaust of species that need to kill other species and eat other species to feed and reproduce. That's why I came up with the idea of writing a book called The Double Face of Biodiversity. Nature is not a Garden of Eden, in which I developed the idea that man is not the innate destroyer of nature, that man has, on the contrary, tried throughout his existence to protect himself from aggressors in order to have a certain physical security. He has tried to secure food resources by cultivating crops and raising livestock, and by developing his ecological niche. That is, by ensuring that there is water all year round. He has built up water reserves, used irrigation. In short, he has developed nature in such a way as to ensure both his biological life and his physical security. It's a thesis that I've defended, and one on which I could say that we also create ecological systems that are appreciated for their biodiversity or for their benefits. Take, for example, the Camargue region in France, which is a totally artificial environment, but which is considered a natural site. So much so that it has been assessed as a Ramsar site. In other words, the holy grail of biodiversity conservation. It has been awarded. I'm thinking of our bocages, which are human creations that are rich in biodiversity. So the idea that man is destroying nature needs to be put into perspective, since we also have many counterexamples of the creation of biodiversity and biological wealth. The dark side of biodiversity, it is disease and all the atrocities that nature can commit against human and animals, because nature makes no distinction between humans and animals, is something we don't talk much about. And we've ended up with the paradoxical situation that what we call nature's nuisances is not an intrinsic quality of nature. Nature is a priori good and generous. But with a little Jesuit reasoning, we can say that in the end, if there are nuisances caused by nature, it's not nature's fault. It's because we're destroying it. It's nature's revenge. by destroying biodiversities, we ensure that we have epidemics like COVID. A few years ago, scientists were even saying that COVID and epidemics are nature's revenge because we're destroying biodiversity. I'd just like to remind you that the UN is a political organization with a great deal of theological and metaphysical influence. The UN is behind the climate and biodiversity conventions, the IPCC and the IPBES, the equivalent of the IPCC for biodiversity. And you may be surprised to see in the IPBES papers expressions that are put in the conceptual framework of this organization, where we see, in quotes, life in harmony with nature, life in balance and harmony with Mother Earth, end of quotes, gifts of nature, Mother Earth, life systems. We can see straight away, and I was reminding you earlier that the UN had instituted a day for Mother Earth, for Mother Nature, that somewhere this organization passes itself off as scientific, but it's nevertheless under a strong mystical or even theological influence. And I think we have to be very careful when we talk about ecology and science about the origin of the comments made. In reality, when it comes to protecting biodiversity around the world, and especially in the developing countries where I've worked extensively, the reality is not necessarily overpopulation, not necessarily technological innovation, but quite simply poverty. And it's true that when the population grows, you need more resources, you need more food. So we have to make sure that when we talk about protecting nature and extending protected areas, we also ask ourselves what we're going to do about the populations who have been excluded from their land and who will ultimately come to feed the urban proletariat. This is a completely questionable line of reasoning on the part of environmental movements, and that they never say what they plan to do with the people who will be excluded from the natural habitats and places to live. If, for example, all the people of the Camargue were asked to leave the Camargue, it would be an interesting experiment. Just a small anecdote, when there was a massive invasion of migratory locusts in East Africa in 2020, which devastated many of the region's crops, there was an eloquent silence from the conservationist movements and the scientists who are often affiliated to these movements. At the same time, there were major bushfires in Australia, and the focus was on counting all the species that had been killed by these bushfires. So there's a totally different attitude toward the human species and toward nature. And you can see that the balance is heavily tipped in favor of nature. To conclude, I'd say that this feeling of fear, because that's what these NGOs are ultimately aiming to create, they want to create fear, a point made by ecologist philosophers such as the German philosopher Hans Jonas, to get us to revive the myth of the apocalypse. In other words, if you don't meet the criteria, if you don't accept the ideas of belief, which used to be God, now it's belief in the goodness of nature, we're effectively heading for a situation that's getting out of hand. And that will eventually be the end of the world, the apocalypse. The big NGOs are thus able to impose their ideology with the strong complicity of scientists. There are many scientists who I would describe as pyromaniacs, who keep the fires burning for reasons that are debatable, but which are linked to obtaining funding. Then there's the media, who obviously want to create a buzz, and I'd say go even further than the scientists, because it sells in the media to present anxiety-provoking information. I've included this little cartoon showing Donald Trump chatting with Aristotle, where Plato says, "I'm sure you agree that truth be created by the repetition of a lie." And to conclude, I'd like to present this little cartoon that I collected at the Rio conference in 1992, which said, save the earth, save the planet, save the children on earth, and save the money. I think that behind all this, there is also economic issues that aren't necessarily very bright. Thank you for your attention.
Ecology movement and saving humanity would be another title that we should have shown. But the next speaker will be Dr. Hans-Bernd Pillkahn. He will join us here at the podium, and he is an engineer and specialist in the metal industry. He is the CEO of his company PROASSORT, a leading technology provider for recycling of steel, copper, and brass. His presentation is called EU Climate Policy, a Disaster for Energy-Intensive Production.
Dear ladies, dear gentlemen, thank you very much for having the opportunity to talk to you today, despite the warm weather. But the good news is in Germany, we are working on a strategy to defeat summer. Just wait 1 or 2 years. So I'm happy to talk to you a bit about the EU climate policy, and from my personal opinion, and perhaps you follow me afterwards, it's a disaster for energy-intensive industry in the EU. Okay. So let's have a look into the EU. And then let's have a look into the climate, and then we have a look together into the industry, okay? So what is the EU? Yeah? The EU covers 4% of the global land area, 4%. The EU has a population of about 6% of the global population. The gross domestic product, so that the value that we create is about 16% of the global value that is been created at the time being. And therefore, we need a lot of energy. We need 13% of all the wattage that is produced in the world. We need about 10% of the... So perhaps you can see it. We need about 10% of the gas consumption of the world. We need about 12% of the oil consumption of the world. Yeah? And then when you have a look at here, we have a self-supply rate in the EU for gas of 11%. 11% of the gas that we need, we produce ourselves. Yeah? Looking at the oil, we have a self-supply of 4%. 4% of the oil that is consumed in the EU, we create ourselves. We lift ourselves. That is, of course, a strong position for political sanctions. Yeah, everybody is clear about that. Yeah, okay, good. So we look a little bit into the atmosphere. I'm going to talk to you that the atmosphere, the air in the atmosphere, weighs 5 multiplied with 10 high 15. That is a 10 with 15 nils. Yeah. Tons of air is in the atmosphere. So that I do not know the English expression, you see, that is a very, very big number. Most of you have to do with 3 nils in your life, yeah? The very rich of you have to do with 4 nils, perhaps. Well, but what is 15 nils is going out of our dimension. Nobody in the world can imagine what that means. Nobody. Okay, so let's go on. So we are on the anthropogenic global warming theory. Yeah? And you've seen I have written theory in gray because all theory is gray. You know that, yeah? Oh. And the electromagnetic radiation, that is what costs one ball of ice cream. Yeah? That is about 1.3 megawatt hours, megawatt when the sun burns directly on the Earth, but only let us say so. 30% of that is really coming into the Earth, and then there we have some problems to manage that amount of energy, and the scientists at the time being are quarreling about that. Are quarreling about that. That is an imbalance. What they think is 0.6 megawatt per square meters. When you compare it with those figures over there, you see you have some doubts of that, whether that 0.6 watt per square meters really can destroy the world. Yeah. Perhaps you have some trouble with that. Okay. So you see, what we always talk about is correlation. Yeah. In Germany, in the area I live in, that is North Rhine-Westphalia. Yeah. So the number of storks, you know, these big birds. Yeah. The number of storks correlates with the number of births. But not even a female Green Party voter would believe that there is a causality. So I come back to the system. You see, I'm always talking with some very intelligent and very wise scientists, engineers, and so on, but no one of them really claims to have fully understood the climate system. There is no one in the world who have understood the climate system. No one. Yeah, they are just narrowing it. Yeah, within their. And there is no evidence whatsoever, no evidence that CO2 accounts for temperature rise. No evidence. Okay. So, next picture, I haven't understood the technology behind. Wie macht man das jetzt hier mit dem nächsten Bild? Here it comes. Yeah. So coming back to the EU policy, you see, EU climate policy is suicide in fear of death. Yeah, very clearly, yeah? Suicide in fear of death. If I'm very fearful of dying, I commit suicide. Yeah. So in December 2019, the EU Commission, that is a French literature expert, it launches the Green Deal. And afterwards, all the commissioners wrote 55 papers. Each paper that thick. Nobody ever can read that. Nobody. Neither in the industry nor somewhere else. Yeah? Nobody. And even if they read it, they do not understand it. 55 papers. Yeah? One of those papers is the EU taxonomy. The next is Fit for 55. The next is EU emission trading system 2. The first was not strong enough, therefore they made a second one. The Green Deal Industrial Plan is rather new. The Net Zero Industrial Act is newer. Yeah, it's just 3 months old or 4 months old. Of course, we have a Critical Raw Material Act. Yeah? And then in May 23, they launched the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. We all know that we are very, very successful in protecting our frontiers. Yeah? We all know that. Yeah? EU is very, very successful. Yeah? Next step is to protect our borders against CO2. Yeah, that's a real mission. No? Okay. So what would Friedrich Schiller have talked about that? Yeah? I read it in German. Ja. Das ist eben der Fluch der bösen Tat, dass sie fortzeugend immer Böses muss generieren. That would Friedrich Schiller have said about the situation. Yeah? So in English, that means if you want created evil, yeah, that automatically spreads if someone is able to stop it. But who is it? Yeah? That is one of the questions you are talking about at the time being. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. This is a nice picture of the future of the world. Yeah? Yeah. You can find it in the internet. Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah. So who is launching that kind of picture? Oh. It's okay. Investment, you can read, still has opportunity to play its part in race to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Investment, okay? So the internet address is esgclarity.com, and ESG is environment, social, and governmental, and governance. Yeah, and that is a EU-installed shadow state to enable financial community to grab as deep in your pockets as possible. So Friedrich Schiller would have said, dem denn nur von Nutzen wird die Welt regiert. Yeah, I hope they can translate it perfectly in English. Nur von Nutzen wird die Welt regiert. So let's talk about the climate policy in Germany. You see, a climate policy in Germany costs 6 billion euro. You know what a billion is? It's very, very easy, yeah? That as 1,000 milliards of euro. That is 1 billion. And it costs 6 billion just in Germany. Over the world, it costs 100 billion euro. Climate neutrality. 100 billion euro. Yeah? That is 10 high 12. That's 10 with 12 nils. Yeah? Okay. So, and who is going to pay for that? Who is going to pay for 6 billion? Yeah? So, pardon? Yes. Yes, 1 trillion, yes. It's too complicated for me. I know that, but it's too complicated. But thank you very much. So who's going to pay for the 6 billion? Yeah, just it's a very simple question. Yeah, is the state, is the government going to pay for that 6 billion? The government has no money. Yeah, no money at all. Yeah? They get their money from you. Huh? Are the companies going to pay the 6 billion? A company is not for paying for costs. They want to earn money. So there is one very simple solution to the question. Yeah, all of you who are sitting in this room, yeah, they are going to pay the 6 billion euro. Of course, yeah. You are too old. Yeah. No, you are too old. Yes. Well, me as well. I'm not. But you all are going to pay for that 6 billion. I mean, and if you cannot, yeah, your children has to pay for it. Very easy. Yeah. But someone has to do so. 6 billion euro. Yeah. Now we are going to calculate, you see. We have in Germany, we have 15 million value creators. They stand up in the morning, yeah, doing something, and when they come home in the evening, yeah, they have done something that has earned money, that has created value. 15 million. I could say it in other words, yeah. 15 million people who pay the government more than they receive from the government. 15 million. Now divide 6 billion through 15 million. So we calculate a second, yeah? It's 400,000 euro. Yeah? And a lady who is going to serve poor people at the time being, for example, yeah? Ill people or so, they can't pay 400,000 euro until 2045. Yeah? So that should be other people. Let me say 5 million people. 5 million people in Germany are going to pay for 6 billion. That is 1,200,000 euro. Each of them, yeah, has to pay until 2045. And if you would be in that situation, what would you do? Yeah? Of course, you try to leave Germany as soon as possible. Yeah? This is very human, I think. Yeah? Okay. Good. And it destroys not only the value creators, but the EU as well. Yeah? You see, we are always talking about EU, and I'm a German, yeah, and I'm standing here not with pride. Yeah? I'm just going to tell you raw figures. They're just figures. Yeah? Germany stands for 25% of the economic performance of the EU. Now imagine what will happen with the EU if Germany can pay for it. Just try to imagine. Yeah? And in 17 of the 27 EU countries, yeah, they reach less than 10% of the German GDP. Less than 10%. So in worldwide context, it's not easy for me to say so, but just from the financial point of view, in the worldwide context, they are nothing. Yeah? Nice people live in there, but financially they earn nearly nothing. Yeah? Okay. So let's talk about energy. Yeah? Very, very complicated theme. Yeah? So how much energy do you have? How much energy do you have? You, personally. No idea? 100 watt per hour. 100 watt. That is your energy you can receive, 100 watt. So for 1 megawatt hour, you have to work 120,000 hours. For 1 megawatt hours. Yeah? So the mankind was always clever. Yeah, after they have related that, yeah, that they have to work very much and very hard for 1 megawatt hour, they invented the horse. The horse helped them. Yeah? The horse only needs 1,360 hours. That's pure physics. You see, that is nothing that comes from it's pure physics. Yeah. So now we are looking about coal. You need 120 kilograms of coal to generate 1 megawatt hour. So afterwards, after the horse, people invented the coal. And then they saw that it's much easier to do things with oil. You only need 86 kilograms of oil to get 1 megawatt hour. Then afterwards, the gas was even more comfortable. So they used gas. Just 95 cubic meters of gas is 1 megawatt hour. Then the 1 megawatt hour of current is, of course, 1 megawatt hour. And hydrogen, you need 333 cubic meters of hydrogen to generate 1 megawatt hour. And 333 cubic meters is a high volume. Okay. Ja, 5 Minuten noch. So I have to explain the world to you in 15 minutes. That's complicated. Okay, so yes. So you see, sending an email is to the satellite is not so much time. It costs not so much time. So the factor is from coal to hydrogen is 14. Is the factor? Yeah, the cost factor. So if you say your industry is able to live with a factor 14 in energy, yeah, everything is good. But I do not believe so. Good. So this is the German power plant capacity as of 1st of January 23. So we eliminated nuclear. The next step is to eliminate lignite. The next step is to eliminate coal. Yeah? The next step is to build 45 gas power stations. Yeah? 45 gas power stations. The next step is to install 50 gigawatt of wind. Yeah? So you only, the work that has been done by 50 gigawatt hours of wind, yeah, is only 10%, 20% of the installed capacity. I think you know that. 20%. Yeah, it's wind. You see, if you install 1 gigawatt of wind, you can only harvest 20% of it, yeah, because the wind does not blow all the time. And then we install 150 gigawatt solar energy that costs, by the way, $300 billion US dollars. $300 billion US dollars. And afterwards, we have a situation that I would call the global West, if you understand what I mean. So just a word to the real truth German gas situation. In Germany, we talk a lot of gas, you see. No? And at the time being, we get half the gas, as we did in 1919. Half of the gas. And the gas is 250% more expensive than in 1990. So it is not the cost of the gas. Perhaps we can live with it, but we do not have it. Yeah? In the next winter, it will be awfully hard in Germany to get a warm, how you call it in English, S. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Good. So we are not talking about there's something in the air tax. This is EU emission trade system because of the time. So you see, the transformation of the industry needs material. In this case, metals. Yeah? And there is a university that is a Catholic university in Leuven, so they should not lie. Yeah? And they said that we need 2,100% of the lithium that we needed in 2020. 2,100%. And hear what I say. Yeah? Never, ever, we will get that amount of lithium to make e-mobility. Never, ever. So this is the world metals and cement refining. Refining means you dig something out of the earth, you see, and afterwards you make metals and cement out of it. That is refining. Yeah? So, and you see, for example, Germany has a very strong position. We are doing 1.5% of the world refining. 1.5%. Yeah? And our partner in the US is very strong as well. They are doing 3.6%. Yeah? Others are a little bit stronger. China is standing for 50% alone. So German industry, what is a German industry? We have 7,000 industry firms, excluding small and medium-sized companies. Yeah? 6,000 and 15% of them are climate intensive. Yeah? So they have 930,000 employees. They earn a gross value added of 3.1 billion euro, and they need 700 terawatt hours of energy. 700, what is a terawatt hour? Yeah? Very easy. 1 terawatt hour is 1 billion kilowatt hours. So you need, at your home, you need 4,000 kilowatt hours, yeah? And the industry is needing 700 terawatt hours. There's a slight difference. Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So €1 price. When the price for electricity and gas is going up for €1, that costs the German industry 350 million euro. €1 costs 350 million euro. Yeah? And we are talking about €50, and we are talking about €100. And now you only have to multiply 350 million with 100, and then you have the sum that the German industry is dealing with. Okay, so the health conditions is not so very good in the intensive industry. We are shrinking year by year, and where's the signal? Here, yeah. Value chain, that is not so important. So just a look on the German industry. Germany had a rather strong industry. We're building about 5.5 million cars in Germany. Yes, you see, that was about 30% of all the cars that have been sold by German automotive factories. So really, we're building 15 million cars around the world, and in Germany we build 3.5 million. That's roughly about 30% or so we are building in Germany. Germany is by far the most expensive automotive construction country in the world, and the German industry is fleeing. You can see it from that curve. So metals, just to have one look, you need 10 megawatt hours for 1 ton of aluminum. If you produce aluminum here on the premises, you need 10 megawatt hours. Yeah? The costs at the time being in Germany are 1,500 euro for 10 megawatt hours. The price at the London Metal Exchange is 1,975 euro, and you see aluminum industry in Europe is dying. That will never ever happen in the future. The same with the copper industry, the same with the steel industry, and with these good views in the future, I will leave you alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pillkahn. The next speaker is Frank Bornschein, who is for more than 10 years now a city councillor of the city of Schwedt, of nearly 33,000 citizens near the Polish border, a business consultant for 3 decades, representative of the peace and freedom sovereignty movement, and he is an expert on one of the largest petrochemical complexes in East Germany, which he will speak about, which supplies 95% of gas, diesel, kerosene, and heating oil for the Berlin-Brandenburg region. Mr. Bornschein's presentation is called De-industrialization, not by accident or chance, but by design, the example of the PCK oil refinery of Schwedt. Please.
Hello. Sehr geehrte Konferenzteilnehmer, sehr verehrte Gäste, ich freue mich, dass ich hier reden darf. Und mein Name ist Frank Bornschein, ich bin 62 Jahre alt.
Dear conference participants, dear guests, my name is Frank Bornschein. I'm 62 years old and come from Schwedt, Oder, in the northeast of the Federal Republic of Germany. I'm a co-initiator of the peace movement in Schwedt and the initiative Peace, Freedom, and Sovereignty. In addition, I'm a city councillor and professionally active as a management consultant. De-industrialization, not by chance, but by design. The example of PCK, Schwedt. First of all, I would like to briefly explain the term and the meaning of de-industrialization. De-industrialization is the term used to describe processes of social or economic change caused by a shrinking of the industrial sectors, especially the heavy and manufacturing industries, in a country or a region. It occurs when the value added in the manufacturing sector declines, and therefore the number of industrial jobs declines, according to a generally accepted definition by the Swiss Academy of Engineering Sciences, SATW, which also conducts ongoing studies on this and related topics. Accordingly, less value added and less employment must both be present over a longer period of time in order to speak of deindustrialization. The situation in Germany is very diverse in this respect, where the core competencies, that means the main focus of industrial production, are dominated by four sectors: the automotive industry, the mechanical engineering industry, the chemical industry, and the electrical industry. The industry requires more than a quarter of the total amount of energy used in Germany. Energy-intensive industries are primarily the chemical and metal industries. However, coal and petroleum processing, as well as the production of glass, ceramics, and paper and cardboard, are also energy-intensive industries. According to the German Federal Statistical Office, these industries required 791 billion kilowatts in 2020, or around 76% of the total amount of energy used in industry. They generated 21% of the gross value added, and in 2020, they employed around 935,000 employees, or around 12% of the workforce in the manufacturing sector in approximately 7,000 companies. That was the situation in 2020, but this situation has been in flux ever since. With the EU's Green Deal of 2019, which follows the recommendations of the Club of Rome of 1972, with its appeal to the limits of growth, and focuses on priorities such as the regulation of the financial market, the energy supply, transport, trade, industry, and agricultural and forestry, thus encompasses almost all core areas of any national economy. This change is to be implemented, where the term regulation simply stands for capacity reduction and restrictions. This is camouflaged or politically underpinned with the intended limitation of the emission of the so-called greenhouse gases to 55% by 2050 in relation to the level of 1990, which is the basis upon which the European climate law was passed on June 30th, 2021. Since then, the dismantling of the industry has been taking place. At present, there are about 880,000 employees today, which is 55,000 less than in 2020. So the industrialization began then. Therefore, one cannot speak here of a coincidental deindustrialization of Germany and also Europe, but it's definitely a plan, and it's also political will behind it. Consequently, the energy-intensive sectors, such as the chemical and metal industries, as well as coal and mineral oil processing, are affected first, and then the neighboring sectors, such as the supply industry and the service sector, that are then affected. I would like now to refer to the example of PCK Schwedt. We see here the pipeline of Schwedt, which lies on the northeast of Germany. Schwedt is a town with a population of around 32,000 in the northeast of Germany, and it's been an important chemical and industrial location since 1965. We have two medium-sized companies in the petroleum processing and paper manufacturing industries, each employing more than 1,200 people, and a further approximately 5,000 employees in the adjacent sectors. Here you see Schwedt. with the 2 PCK, where you can see that 2,000 tons or more are treated. Now, until the end of 2021, before the intensification of the Ukraine conflict, 11 million tons of crude oil were processed there annually. And I myself learned my first profession here at the PCK. And as I said, until the end of 2021, about 11 million tons of crude oil were processed here, which was mainly supplied from Russia via the Druzhba or Friendship oil pipeline. But with the stop of the purchase of Russian oil at the turn of the year 22-23, the PCK was supplied via the existing pipeline from the port of Rostock, which, however, only has a capacity of 6 million tons, and where, as a result of this, only a utilization of approximately 55% could be achieved, whereas the break-even point is 70%. Therefore, even with the intended supply of Kazakh oil of 1.2 million tons, the break-even point can only be reached gradually. That even in the best case, the PCK will remain at the edge of the break-even point. Now, the actions of the politicians are aimed at appeasement, calming, and also deception, by, for example, forming a so-called task force or a committee for transformation, which has also succeeded, at least to a large extent, and among the workforce. Also, the mood is still pretty good, despite the dissatisfaction, because they're not told the truth. Because there's a guiding paper of the Federal Ministry of Economics from 2019, which provides for the drastic reduction of the consumption of fuels from fossil feedstocks to 40% by 2030 and to 10% by 2050 relative to the 2018 level. This target is also included in the German government's coalition agreement of 2021 and thus is a firm political will. At that point, the aggravation of the Ukraine conflict had not yet taken place, but this is now used by politicians as a cover for their actions. The employees themselves have an employment guarantee until the end of 2024, and then another year in the event of a sale. And this is in line with the statutory regulations for company takeovers. So it has been possible to avoid widespread discontent among the workforce until now. However, it can be assumed that that will change starting in autumn of this year, when it's more and more foreseeable that there will be no further employment for many employees in the medium term, because even with the continued operation at the edge of the break-even point, entire manual production and control lines will be eliminated in the course of digitation, where in the end only a maximum of around 250 to 300 employees will be still working at the PCK. And even if the reduction is reduced to 30%, it's also guaranteed that there will be regional bottlenecks. And I would also like to mention that the second largest company, the paper mills, are right now in the reorganization process or in planned insolvency. Our initiative, Peace, Freedom, and Sovereignty, will direct our activities toward informing the public and continuing the protest against this development and these plans. This will be done through demonstrations, vigils, and events such as the planned Peace Festival at the end of August. We'll use car parades and also networking with other initiative groups from neighboring towns and districts. And last but not least, we develop offers to the people themselves how things can be better in a better society. We're convinced that we will succeed in doing something effective to counter this devastating policy, and I wish all of us much strength and success. And I thank you very much that I was allowed to speak here. Thank you.
Mr. Bornschein for coming all the way from Schwedt to Strasbourg to make the case and show the dramatic situation in the German industry. We have now Professor Alberto Prestininzi. He is a geologist from the Sapienza University of Rome, the director of CERI, if my pronunciation is correct. It's a forecast research center for the prevention and control of geological hazards. And he is the leader of the Italian section of Clintel, which is an independent foundation that operates in the field of climate change, climate policies. He was also, I was informed, recently appointed to serve in a government advisory board for the construction of the Messina Bridge between mainland China and the Sicilian island, which he has long fought for. And please join me in welcoming Professor Prestininzi and Climate Between Emergency and Knowledge.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and I am very happy to stay here this evening. Thank you of the LaRouche for organization of this big meeting. It's very, very good. I will speak Italian, and we have the biggest of translator, Claudio, from Italy to English. We hope to translate from English to French and Deutsch. Parlerò italiano perché devo parlare di numeri e a seguito del relatore che mi ha preceduto, non l'altro, i numeri sono soggetti a difficile pronuncia perché si tratta di bilioni e bilioni di euro che noi cittadini europei stiamo pagando per una serie di cose e il gruppo italiano Clintel.
I will talk about figures, and figures are a difficult subject. One must be precise. And we citizens are paying for a series of things or reasons. The Italian Clintel, Intelligence Climate Group, which is part of the European Foundation led by Gus Berghout, with 1,500 scientists throughout the world, asked this question of climate change and understood as scientific analysis of what they are saying. For years, we Italians, teachers, scientists, have tried to say the few times that the media opened their doors to us, because their door is closed to us, we tried to speak a scientific language which became not understandable. So we decided to change, to take a new way, and I carried a book together with scientists, which, while keeping a basic scientific language, explains Italian citizens, and next will be published in several languages. We called it Dialogues on Climate Between Emergency and Knowledge. We wanted to give some figures to make it understood, especially in a moment with crises like the one we heard about in Germany, but the same thing goes for Italy and other nations. They become now heavy for the pockets of citizens throughout the world. So therefore we have what you see below, the Italian scientists. They are all members of Clintel, and we drafted a petition to the Italian President of the Republic saying that there is no climate emergency. We have an emergency of pollution, but the media, in a way, in a cute way, I would say, Greta Thunberg knows something about it, they mix very well the cards, mixing climate with pollution. It's two totally different things. So, therefore, we wanted first to warn the state president, who, of course, for his own reason, did not decide to answer to 200 scientists who signed it, has decided not to take care of pollution or not about climate. So we wrote this book. I show you the cover, emphasizing three fundamental points. Among other things, on the 15th, this book will get a prize, a literature prize, because it's among the finalists in an Italian competition, book competition. The hypotheses which we formulated are three. There is no climate emergency, and we demonstrate it. Secondly, it's facts and not hypotheses that determine scientific knowledge. We are confusing people because they take hypotheses and they say these are scientific evidence. It's two different things. Third, it's knowledge that must guide politicians to take choices and not hypotheses. Political choices which have a large fallout on people must be taken on the basis of knowledge, not of hypothesis. For the first point, we borrowed a statement of this great woman, Marie Curie, who, by the way, is the only person who had two Nobel Prizes, one for chemistry and one for physics. You know, all of you, what she suffered, this woman, together with her husband, for discovering radiations. Marie Curie said, nothing in life should be feared. It should only be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we can fear less. This is the slogan, because this story of climate is based on fear, and we will see it now. I wanted to say, without boring you too much, what's the difference between hypothesis and knowledge? Research is based on hypotheses. Hypotheses are the result of thought, and they are what is the basis of research, but few hypotheses then turn into knowledge or scientific truths. Only those hypotheses which turn into scientific truth become knowledge, and knowledge is never ending. Therefore, we must make sure that politics listens to science and knowledge, not to hypotheses. Because today this paradigm has been totally subverted. And how did they subvert it? With the role of information. The point number 3, information nowadays is so pervasive, and we will see with some examples of major Italian newspapers, which have been translated in English, and they have different data or dates. Those journalists already speak in the name of science, and they spell out the gospel of the IPCC without knowing why, but they say, oh, the scientists say this. Start, for example, in 1989. We have 10 years to save the planet. From 1989 to 2023, this year, the last IPCC report comes out with this information. We have 10 years to save the planet. I allowed myself to draft this small chart so that you understand better what is the sense of such terroristic communication. Here we have the date of emissions of the IPCC, 10 years to save the Earth. I called this the death line of the planet, the death line of the planet. Therefore, this line is now going to infinite because terror continues, forgetting that today people start to pay and therefore asks questions. Why, after 10 years, starting from this date, nothing happened? Now, the last report, the Antonio Guterres, the legendary secretary of the UN, we asked him to explain to us why we have still 10 years. We have another 10 years to save the planet. So this is the death line, and we see in this timeline what happened to the planet. Did it die? Did it resuscitate? What's the state of health of the planet? Let's look at it. These are data, real data, by satellites. In the last 50 years, the planet has increased the vegetable mass by 30%, 30%. The planet is greener. It's better. Nothing happened. This is the Sahel. Look at the Sahel. It's going back. The story of desertification, which is overall also in Italy, where we have a lot of woods. We have wood also in the middle of Rome, just to say something. They grow on the road. The vegetable mass of the planet is better, and when the green is better, also because because of this small percentage of CO2, which issue is the food for plants. Life on the earth is based on CO2. They are creating a tremendous ignorance in the schools. Agriculture, in 1950, when we were 3.5 billion on the earth, billion people, had 50% of denutrition, 50%. Now we are 8 billion and denutrition is 10%. Agriculture has responded to the signal by increasing we don't have it, but this is the wheat. It shows what wheat is, what the soy, then maize or corn. These are 4 staple foods, the most important staple food in the world. If we take the last years, in this circle we have the last years since when the story of the 10 years deadline came out. Let's look at what happened on the planet. This is the trend of denutrition in the world. If we look the last years from 1980 on, the speed of reduction of denutrition has increased in an incredible way. That means that despite we are 8 billions, the agricultural system succeeds in feeding, well feeding, or feeding people better than before. This must not induce us to confuse with distribution of wealth. The distribution of wealth is another thing, but we are talking here about FAO data where they took as a value, per capita value, 1.9 euro per capita per citizen. These are data published by the FAO. This is the distribution of life expectancy that for the luckiest countries is well over 80, but also for other countries went over 70. That means that the planet is not dying. So this terrible threat, where we have 10 years to save the planet, it's important that people understand it. This is the message that we must start to give. We said that as concerns scientific questions, the forums are the universities, they are not the talk shows. But we have to give this message to the people.
Altra storia che stanno aumentando gli eventi estremi. Ricerche serie fatte a livello globale mostrano.
Another story is that extreme events are increasing. Serious research made at the global level show how since 1900 to today there is a net decrease of extreme events like tropical cyclones, tornadoes, as temperature increases, because since the people has been made ignorant, there is illiteracy of returning. And I found it out in Italy, because when we had a drought and then a flood, nobody spoke about prevention. We have studies in Italy how to improve prevention, but nobody spoke about prevention. They only talk about extreme events, climate change, which, according to them, has produced such extreme events. Hurricanes have decreased. You can watch the chart. And these are decades from 1851 to 2010. And hurricanes divided by intensity of energy, the frequency has decreased and the intensity has decreased as well. The increase of the level of the sea level, which in 1977 should be 6 meters, should have been 6 meters. The last data tell us 0.085 millimeters, and one part of this is because of the increase of volume due to temperature, because water slightly warmed up. Temperature is going up, yes, because we are coming out of the last small glacial ice era, and this quota of increase is totally normal. It repeats what happened in the last 11,000 years. These data are documented. When we challenge the people who say these things and tell them, come to me and confront yourself with me, discuss with me, we want that do this. Their climate models are not able to simulate what happened on the Earth really. And they claim they can project in the next 100 years what will happen without being able to simulate what happened last year. This is the increase of sea level done by the oceanographic campaign which has gone on for years. As concerns temperature, I just show you the first Hansen model, which led to the Congress, brought the first terror message in the Congress of the United States. I just show you this. They said if we don't reduce CO2 to zero, then it would increase, the temperature would increase, so and so. 2020 has arrived, and we are at 2020. What happened? This happened, that the Hansen projection, the red one, and look at the reality below that. CO2 increased much more than what they projected, but temperature followed a natural trend, which has been measured both with aerostatic balloons but also with satellites. Satellites are much more reliable. This is the trend of temperature. Then we have other data which I wanted to show because they are impressive on people. Look at this. This is the medieval warm Roman heat period, where Romans had 2 degrees more, and a very accurate investigation has been done in the Mediterranean. And Hannibal went up the Mount Cenisio Mount with his elephants, and now it's closed because of snow. The last data, as you see, we have the mummy of Simulan, which is a mummy which they found at 3,500 meters height in northern Italy at the border with Austria. How comes that it mummified at 3,500 meters? Because there was no ice. Because at that time there was no ice. Now we have a glacier there, and at that time there was no ice. We are here, look. This is a small ice period. In Venice, they would skate on the Laguna in Venice. And today, temperature, you see, is increasing because it's recuperating everything, which has always occurred, because that's nature. But the trend of CO2 is this one. Look, this is the holocenic warm, where temperatures were 4 degrees higher than today. This is the large investigation by the Italian research in the Mediterranean, measuring temperature of seawater, which in the Roman period was 2 degrees higher. In the largest Italian glacier, 3,000 meters high, a piece of wood dated with carbon-14 demonstrates that about 3,000 years ago the glacier was not there. There was a large wood. That's the mummy, which he was mentioned before, which they found there. And this is the mummy of a marmot on the Monte Rosa, there at the border with France, at almost 4,500 meters. And, you know, a mummy becomes such when there is no ice. 2 words on what has happened in Italy this year, because we heard everything about it. Italy is one of the most rain-rich countries in Europe. We have 282 billion cubic meters of water per year. Italy consumes only 18 billions between drinkable water, agricultural water, industrial water. What happens to this water when it falls, when it rains? You know what Italy is. It's a boot with a long mountain chain, which is the Apennines, and slopes that go to the sea. So this water goes immediately to the sea through rivers, creating hydraulic risk, death, and pouring water in the water. So it would be enough to build up dams to produce hydroelectric energy, control floods, and having water for the entire year. But when there is no water, they cry, oh, drought, drought. When there is water, too much water, they cry, oh, too much water, they cry. And that's climate, of course. These are the data that show how Italy is much more rainy than Rome, than Paris. Paris has a regular distribution. Italy is irregular, but because in summer there's not much rain. But let's not lose time. Let's go and look at... this is a curve which I made in my research on the as she said on that line, we had the average of rain on the Italian territory, 282 billion cubic meter. And there I put the excess, the surplus of when it rains more and when it rains less. So you see that the distribution, more and less, it's totally regular from 1900 to today. When they say that extreme rains and floods are increasing, they tell you fairy tales, because this did not occur. We have it. These are the droughts and these are the floods, but it is a characteristic of the territory, of the Italian territory. It rains like that. These are data which are in the data banks which we have. I wanted to show how the IPCC produces its reports. They say, oh, it's scientists who say this. No, the scientists do not speak in those reports. Scientists send their data, and then economists alone write reports together with representatives of environmental ministers. So they ask scientists to send data on rain in the last 30 years, measured with rain pluviometers, or rain measurements. On 5,000 and more stations, 4,146 say that rainfall has no variations or no significant variations. So this is in the report, page 1560. So it's not Alberto Prestininzi who says this, it's the IPCC. And then and a small part has an excess of rainfall, and a small part has a regress. What did they write in the final report? That in the last 30 years there is a clear signal of increase of the intensity of rain and a clear diminution. And these are the data. The reports are built not listening to the scientists. When you read on the newspapers that it's the scientists who say this, they tell you a big lie, because it's economists who write it. The IPCC is led, it's in an intergovernmental panel led by governments which are members and run by economists. Not by chance, the chairman of the IPCC, the presidents have all of them have been economists. This is the drought. This is a world research saying that drought areas have been decreasing drastically, and actually it is coherent with the increase of vegetation, which we have seen before. So in Italy, we haven't built dams since 2020. Stop to construction of dams. Italy would need, like bread, dams to control floods, produce hydroelectric energy, and water, abundant water throughout the year, because 282 billion of cubic meter of water we have of rainfall. Last thing I wanted to show, this is the report the World Bank writes every year to list the risks of all countries in the world. And I was curious to see what the risks of Italy were. And Italy has more deaths for landslides, floods, and earthquakes. These are my data, because I have studied this in my life. It says that the risk of Italy is due by failure of climate action. The crisis of public debt, extreme events, which are not there, the geopolitization of strategic resources, and digital gap. I want to look at Turkey, they had 50,000 deaths for the earthquake, and they have the same risks as Italy. These are the real risks that Italy has. Since 1900, we had 250,000 deaths because of landslides, floods, and earthquakes, and 6.4 billion per year of damages. These are the signals which we gave to the president, the state president, which we can combat this. We can fight this with prevention, because we have a law in Italy, which is a law to defend the land, which is very advanced, but they don't use it. They put it in the drawer. And this is what I think, which we must tell everybody if we want to change things. Thank you.
Grazie, Professore Prestininzi. So before we have our final presentation, I would like to say that unfortunately Dr. Pillkahn cannot stay for the discussion, but we will have a discussion after the next. We start a little late, so we will take a couple of minutes more to answer your questions. The next speaker is Professor Karl Otto Weiss, a physicist from Germany, an expert in laser physics, and he is also an advisor to the European Climate and Energy Institute. He is a director and professor of the National Metrology Institute of Germany. This is not meteorology, but metrology, the science of measurements. And Professor Weiss and Professor Horst Lüdecke are the main pioneers of the solar cycle theory of climate science. So his presentation will be how solar cycles determine Earth's climate. Please come to the podium.
Hello. I have to make the, usual remarks about thanking for inviting me to give this lecture to a large audience. The larger the audience, the better for the talk. And I want to talk about something which is in my field. It's physics. And basically, I want to elucidate what makes the climate change over the thousands of years and even now. I have to apologize. I have to stick a little bit to my manuscript because my advisor, Andrea Andromedas, told me that the interpreters need a manuscript which is most close to what I'm talking about. This is unusual for me because normally I just speak freely without a manuscript, so I apologize for being a little bit, let's say, formal or something like that. Okay, so this is the introduction, so to say. So I want to talk about what makes the climate change, and I take the final result already now here. It comes out that all the change we see and have seen in the past is driven by solar cycles, and CO2 has in fact hardly any influence. So I take this result before, and after that I can show you how we come to that conclusion and how we analyze this mathematically. Okay, first, before I go into the physics, let me mention how I became interested in this subject. I mean, even in the 1990s, let's say every scientifically educated person could see that the official statements about climate change due to CO2 could not be true because there were many internal inconsistencies and contradictions. So even then we discussed, as is usual for scientists over coffee, the different things, and basically we laughed at the primitivity of the official lies. We really were amused about how primitive the lies were. Okay, I did not have much time to look into this because Well, I mean, I had my regular 40 employees, 10 of whom I had to feed by projects, which means about $1 million a year I had to find. And so that left me little time for things apart from physics. But, well, at some point I decided to retire. And after having found a good person to replace me, I looked into this subject more deeply because now I had time. And what I did, of course, was what most people did. They looked at the model calculations, which were officially published and also published in the literature. And, pretty soon it comes out that in the models there were numbers which were not correct. And so it became clear that in the models there's a lot of cheating. I left this field of models because I'm an experimental physicist. I like to work in the lab, and I like to work with measurements instead of theoretical assumptions. And so I joined together with colleagues, among them Horst Lüdecke, and we decided to do something which is very usual in any kind of technology or physics, and that is called Fourier transform. I mean, if you have an irregular series of numbers, and you want to know is there any regularity in it hidden, the instrument to do that is called Fourier transform, which is basically nothing else than looking for periodic functions within these data sets which you have. So basically you're looking for what is called cycles or periodic time evolution. And that's called Fourier transform. So how did we proceed? We first looked, of course, up the literature and found, to our big surprise, that among the about 500,000 publications, there was not a single one which did this Fourier transform on measurement data, even though this is the most common way of analyzing irregular data in science and technology. But anyway, so we were surprised, but anyway we said, well, if nobody has done that, we will do that. We took data from published literature for about 2,000 years climate. And can I have the first slide? Next slide. Okay, this is just to show you that this has been published and reviewed, and this is all correctly treated. Next slide. Okay, here you get a view where we got our data from. We have the distribution roughly around the globe. What is missing here, for some reason, is the famous Vostok ice core in Antarctica. But that is a very important, data, and so they are included, even though the point here is missing. The different colors show just what kind of proxy you have. Tree rings, sediments, stalagmites, something like that. And so we took all the data we could have, and it's a little bit complicated process, but in the end you get a temperature record for 2,000 years, and that is shown in the next slide. Yes, you see the gray values are the yearly values which we got from the data. The data were about 500,000 measurements, and so we could, since we need annual values, we could just average a lot, so that reduces the noise. But you see in the gray values, which are the final yearly values, that there's still a noise Okay, but that's always so in physics. You never have any noiseless things. Okay, so those are the data, the gray values, which we use for the analysis. The first thing, you go to the definition of what is climate. Climate is scientifically defined as the average of temperatures over 30 years. And the blue curve, which you see, is exactly this 30-year average. And you see that the historically known things come out very nicely. You see, for instance, a maximum around Roman time. You see the medieval maximum. You see, of course, also our present maximum. You also see the Little Ice Age around 1500, and it really shows interestingly how detailed this reconstruction is. If you look around 1500, precisely 1451, there is this deep blue minimum, and that is very well known, even though hardly studied, but it's very well known from the biography of Louis XI, so the French king, and that was a time when even in southern France all the grapes were destroyed by the cool climate. Okay, you see, even those little maximum minima are represented. And what you also see is, of course, around 1850, the temperature rises. And that is exactly what is officially ascribed to CO2 warming. Okay, so this is just the reconstruction. So we have data now which we can analyze. Okay, the next thing we do is we take our original values, which are the gray values in this graph, and do the Fourier analysis on it. Can we have the next slide? Here you see what is called the spectrum, which is basically showing the magnitude as a function of, let's say, periods of frequencies. And what you see is there are three main periods. The smallest one is 1,000-year period. The next one is 460-year period. And the last one is 190-year period. Now, those periods are very well known already before we did this from local measurements. So like measurements somewhere in China or in the US, always you found these. And so the only thing we showed here is that these periods, which are locally known already, were in fact important for the whole global temperature. And these frequencies have names according to who discovered them. So the lowest, the 1,000-year period, is the so-called SÜS cycle. The middle one was discovered by a Russian scientist, and the lowest one is the most studied one. It's called the de Vries cycle. So they were named after the after the persons who discovered them. Okay, now we have a reconstruction, and the fact that we got known frequencies for the periods again shows that these are not mathematical artifacts or something, but that they are realistic things, because they were already known before and we found them again, so it must be realistic. Okay, okay. I have to mention for this for people who are not so familiar with Fourier transform, that periodic things show up as these big maxima, and non-periodic things, like it would be if you had warming due to industrial development. That's non-periodic. It's just going straight up and not periodic. So those things show up in the spectrum as broad background. Now, we don't see here any broad background, but there is the danger, if you are familiar with Fourier transform, that the broad backgrounds, which is low, can be masked by noise. And so in order to avoid that this possibly existing non-periodic component would be covered by noise in the spectrum, we just transformed everything back, and we have the next slide. Okay, here you see the three maxima which I've shown in the time representation. The longest one, black, is the eddy cycle, very well known. The blue one is the Babish cycle from the Russian person who discovered it. And the green one is the 190-year de Vries cycle. Okay, and you have okay, I shouldn't talk more about that. And you see why we have these maxima at Roman times, medieval times, and now, because that is exactly the maxima of the eddy cycle of the black line. Okay, now let's go, well, next slide. Okay, I repeat here these two graphs just to illustrate. You have again here the cycles. What I have given here in red is the sum of the three cycles, and you see the sum of the three cycles very well represents the whole history of 2,000 years. Okay. So that means, okay, as in the spectrum where there are only three strong resonances, you have a complete domination of the time, the history of temperature. And so the most remarkable thing is, of course, around the year 2000. You see that the values in blue and black were rising. And you see that the cycle sum, the sum of the three cycles, are just rising as much as the measurements. So what does that mean? It means the increase of temperature from, let's say, 1870 to, let's say, to present is in fact due to the three cycles, and not to CO2, because the natural evolution of the cycles already gives the full increase in temperature. So that is the main result first, yeah? So keep that in mind. Three cycles determine completely the history of the temperature over 2,000 years, and in particular, they determine completely the rising of temperature from 1850-70 to now, which is officially described to CO2. So that means all this talk about CO2 warming is just not correct, yeah? So it's just wrong. Okay, now we can ask more, where do these three cycles come from? Okay, next slide, please. Can we have next slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a recording of the solar activity for 8,000 years. This is Swiss author, and you see the three biggest maxima are exactly what we find in the Earth's climate. So what that means is the climate of the Earth is governed by the solar activity. So the solar activity causes the climate in Germany, in the world to change. Yeah? And we have further the insight where these cycles in the solar activity come from. According to the latest publications of this year and a couple of years before, these cycles are due to planetary motion. So what it really means is the climate on Earth is determined by the planetary motion. I mean, it's a little bit like you would say that it's like astrology. The planets determine our climate, but the mechanism by which the planets and their tide forces control the sun on the one hand, and the way in which the solar activity controls the climate is in the meantime very well understood. I mean, the tide forces on the sun from the planets is understood only a year ago. But anyway, it's a clear thing. It was a very interesting paper, had a lot of resonance in the scientific literature. So what we have is the first result, which is politically important, is CO2 has only a very minor role in determining the climate. The climate is determined by the solar activity, which in turn seems to be governed by the planetary motion. So that we have a full picture, and I think it's very clear what's going on, especially with the latest, let's say, the latest publications in the last 2 years. Okay, that's basically what I wanted to say. I want to describe how the climate of the Earth is determined first by cycles, which are identified as solar cycles, where the solar cycles come from, and finally it's up to the planetary motion. Okay, that gives a complete picture, and if you ask me, I mean, you could say that's an interesting result, and in fact, I mean, there are people who have said there are 10,000s of climate scientists and they don't get a clear picture of science, and then come two old and retired professors and solve the whole problem with a little bit of homework, yeah? And they said, well, that would merit a Nobel Prize. Okay, I don't think we will get a Nobel Prize because it's not politically correct what we find out, but, well, there are people who suggest we should be nominated at least. Okay, so thanks for your attention for the last talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we do have time for a couple of questions. We still have Professor Weiss, Mr. Bornschein, and Professor Prestininzi. And I would like to add to the podium someone else. Helga Zeppler-Rouge, maybe you can come up and also give us your insights into some of the questions that are coming in. Do we have a microphone for the public? Go ahead, be courageous. Aha. We have a courageous gentleman. Please say your name and your affiliation.
My name is Robert Lechner-Schobel, and first I'd like to thank you for the great presentations. And it became very clear that we have a subject that is basically the survival of the civilized world, because without energy it does not work. And I had also 3 publications in the magazine Fusion. And there is one point, and I'd like to mention some points and ask the question, what can we do to strengthen our force to fight against what came from the IPCC? For me, the IPCC is the world's largest fraudulent organization. And I will explain it why. I looked on the subject climate with the question behind, do we have enough time before we have fusion energy available? And I found out, speaking with experts, a friend of mine who worked 4 years for the IPCC, and his scientific results were changed from the framing department of the IPCC, and he denied to sign. And another Kaupinen brought this wonderful model, and brought that a major fail is in the calculation. The heat storage capacity of the planet is different between continent and sea. And you brought a wonderful picture, dear Professor Weiss, and the Austrian Österreichisch-Bayerische Gesellschaft made a symposium 21 years ago, and you had been one of the speakers. And I have your files in my computer from those old days. Yeah. Okay. And so we know that something is going out of the way. We know wind energy brings 100 times more warming to the land, based on the studies that came from the US, more warming on the land as global cooling. 100 times is the difference. So we cannot go this way. And for me, the question is, what can we really do? What Clinton is doing, what you are doing, what ICA is doing to strengthen the forces, so that we get an impact. From the scientific point, there's always a thesis and an antithesis and a synthesis. And we have currently, globally, the situation that the government are funding only what they like with the ideology.
Okay, thank you very much.
And how can we break this?
Okay, thanks very much. Who would like to make the first statement?
Thank you, Claudio, in a position for translation. Very important, this question. Ok, la domanda è cosa possiamo fare per combattere la
The question is, what can we do to fight the IPCC? It's very difficult, but not impossible. Now, if you open the link clintel.org, you will find a report written by 1,500 scientists who criticize and write the falsifications in the last IPCC report. They write it, the data, the numbers, there's everything. I understand that we must intensify our activity. We must therefore convince our friends, so to speak, politicians, our political friends, so to speak, that they also have sons and grandchildren, because they cannot go on the whole life so such stupidities, because the social cost of it is enormous. There is a change of paradigm. Today we heard Germany, how much energy or solar energy and wind energy has. I think the largest in Europe. Hungary has almost zero renewables. The citizens of Germany ask themselves why the electricity bill in Germany is double as high as the one in Hungary, despite they tell us that the reduction of the electricity bill the cost of our electricity and electricity is reduced only through the transition with the renewables. It's exactly the opposite, because renewables, in the first place, they cannot solve the problem, but here we would go into a scientific discussion. But from the practical standpoint, the cost to design and build solar fields and wind parks is low because we pay for it, because the state gives incentives, and this cost is then redistributed on the electricity bill. Those who don't have it, they don't have such costs. Is it possible that they don't understand that they started a mechanism by which electricity, which is an energy vector and needs a primary energy source, is aligned to the cost of the highest primary energy, which is gas. Coal is cheaper, but we produce 30% with coal, and we pay for it as if we produce it with gas. With nuclear energy, it's 1/3, but we pay it as if it was produced with gas. All this hoax, if we don't analyze it and explain it to the common people that knows only that the planet is dying and they're worried, well, it's difficult to be able to do anything. In my view today, there are the conditions, the framework condition to do something, because people start to measure the cost of such choices, and therefore it's fundamental to stay together. This kind of meeting of today, which puts together more interests but which are intimately connected, look that climate is the instrument through which they are building all the paradigms that we discussed in these days, from peace to energy. All is being made through this paradigm of climate. Because if this house of cards falls down, then they change the paradigm. Before, it was called global warming. Now it's called emergency, climate emergency. They are changing because with the temperature they cannot explain it anymore. Sometimes they go down. Yesterday, the Italian newspaper said that the third day we had the highest temperature ever in the world. So they keep saying these things which we must absolutely find a way to say that it's a hoax and have people understand this.
There are 3 steps, which is information. We have to call up examples from our own life in our talks with friends, colleagues, and initiatives. We have to document these examples and show them. In my case, there's one wonderful document, which is the Chronics of the 20th Century, which was published by Bertelsmann, and there's every month listed of 10 climate stations in Europe from the first of 1900 to, and you can put these data together and use these data and present them, and I can say, ironic, you could say that Bertelsmann, one of the leading corporations in the world, if Bertelsmann itself says these data are wrong, whom should we believe, Bertelsmann or nature? And then it's a very important aspect is the exchange of information. I have today heard for the fourth time about Clinton, and then I looked up the website so I can use them and carry the information better. And so thank you.
Individual panelists. This young gentleman. Okay, please come to the microphone.
Bonjour, chers tous. Moi, c'est Diallo Adama. Je viens de la Belgique. Je suis burkinabé. Voilà. D'abord, je vous remercie pour vos brillantes interventions. Et de là aussi va découler ma question.
I am from Belgium and I was born in Burkina Faso. First of all, thank you for your wonderful intervention. And here is my question, because I have learned a lot today. I didn't know anything about that. I just learned it today. And I want to know, we in school, in university, we have learned that CO2 and the emission rejected by the industries destroy the ozone layer and then generate the climate change with droughts and flood and the destruction of the soil. What do you think about this? Why are we teaching, why they are teaching that in the university? Is it? It's kind of a conspirationist thinking, teaching by these studies. And secondly, there is a concept that we call on this green energy. Maybe you can give me some information about it, on its impact on life of industry, on this geopolitical issue, because we are talking about to protect nature, to protect the forests, to limit the emission of greenhouse gases. And all around this concept, what we call green energy, there was a kind of geopolitical, philosophical tradition.
It's very good.
Thank you very much.
I am sorry for all students in the world. My book is born with University of Rome. Beh, parlo in italiano così traducono. Io ho difficoltà come professore dell'Università di Roma a presentare questo libro nella mia università, che è nato con docenti dell'università che hanno scritto sotto l'egida di un importante centro di ricerca.
So I have myself in trouble presenting this book in my university, despite there is the name of the university on top of the book. Tell him to go ahead. Therefore, the answer is this one. Unfortunately, governments control university programs, and therefore they prevent students from knowing the views even of those who don't think the same way. It would be good if students were informed, as it is, should be right, that this is a school, this is research, a complete information, not a partial information. Unfortunately, in the world, this is occurring, not a partisan information. I called it a collective illiteracy in return. After the last war, illiteracy in Italy was 40%. There was one basic school teacher, Maestro Manzi, who was a hero because he created a school reducing illiteracy by 30%. Today, it's necessary to reduce scientific illiteracy by a high percentage. This is important. When they tell us what they must do, we must do this. We must be careful that our children in the school get a non-partisan teaching.
I just want to do it very shortly. I want to answer to your question. Is this eine Verschwörung, as you said, yeah? Yeah. Or how is the mechanism? And the answer is very simple. Everything is determined by financial dependencies. Think of the European Climate Foundation. It controls 500 NGOs. She finances that, and if you go back where the money comes from for the European Climate Foundation, you come to the well-known cases, Rockefeller Foundation. Basically, it's financed by the what we call the financial oligarchy, and the background why they finance that is, as has been said very many times here, they want to preserve their power. And I mean, in extreme scenarios, they want to impoverish the world populations. They want basically to reduce the world populations to about 1 or 1.5 billion. And I say, according to what official statements say, they want to reduce this to this rest of this 1.5 or 1 billion to gene-modified working slaves. Yeah, that's the plan which is behind all this. And the first step is to impoverish the population by telling them you're not allowed to drive cars, you're not allowed to use an airplane, you're not allowed to eat meat, and blah blah blah. And this is the first stage, and we talk about vaccination, that's another thing. But okay, so I wanted to say, what is the mechanism which drives all these people to claim that CO2 is a dangerous thing?
Es ist wichtig, sich diese Sache im Verlauf der Geschichte anzugucken. Wir sind darauf gestoßen, weil wir schon in den 70er Jahren eine ganz klare Vorstellung hatten für eine gerechte neue Weltwirtschaftsordnung. Also wir hatten Pläne geschrieben für die Industrialisierung für Afrika, Lateinamerika, Asien. Und das war eigentlich in der zweiten Entwicklungsdekade.
Already in the 70 years, we had plans for the development of the whole world. And the second earlier times it was self-understood that you had these decadal plans to develop the world. In 1976, perhaps the Pope Paul VI wrote an encyclical Populorum Progressio on the progress of the peoples, and it was a call to overcome underdevelopment, and that was the battle. And then 1972, the Club of Rome came up with a book, The Limits to Growth. It's okay. It's okay. And that was their claim that until 1970 the world develops, but now we had the limits to growth, and now we had to cut down on expenses and curb development. And at that time, Lyndon LaRouche, who was at that time not my husband, he said, this is bunk. What is a resource is defined by the technologies that you develop to use things as a resource. And for every technology, there is a relative limit to the resources, but it's human creativity which is able us to always develop new technologies that use other resources. So in the Stone Age, we had stones and used to hit people and kill them. And then we had Brzezinski people, and if we would today use these stones from the Stone Age, they would say this is an ore that could use. But this lie that there are limits to growth, that was with $1 billion and Deutsche Marks and yuan published and spread around the world so that people were indoctrinated that there are limits to growth. This was the beginning of the green movement. There were environmental protection and conservation movements earlier as part of the British colonialism, but the green movement that we have now and that destroys Germany with their ideological economic policy, that started with the Club of Rome. And that was supported by all the top financiers, British Petrol, Shell. They spent a lot of money. They invented games for pupils that were distributed to all schools, where pupils were indoctrinated that there are limits to growth. And so this idea was totally artificially created. And we have this Malthusian ideology. That's the oligarchy. A small elite is supposed to control everything, and all the other people are a lower class of population. And this ideological component is very obviously present. And then there are other people who can make a lot of money implementing the green reset, and that's why they go along. And I can give you a lot of links. We have a huge documentation of and fortunately all this is now rejected by the people and the nations of the global south. They have understood that this is a tool to prevent development of South America, Africa, Asia, and therefore it's so important that when Ramaphosa said pay for the Inga Dam, and then you're serious about what you talk about.
More. Unfortunately, time is pressing on us. It's now 4:30, and I would like to give the concluding words to Schiller Institute Chairwoman Helga Zepp-LaRouche to give us her concluding remarks and some words of where do we go from here. Would you like to say something? I put her on the spot.
Ich möchte mich erstmal ganz herzlich bei allen Rednern bedanken, hier am Podium und allen anderen und auch natürlich dem Publikum, dass sie unter diesen extrem schwierigen Umständen.
I want to thank all the speakers who and also the audience that you have spent so much attention to us for 2 days under these conditions, but I don't release you without you promising that you will help us becoming active. We need all the activists that we can get. We have resolutions. The text is now formulated, between some of the speakers, and do we have time to read it, or is it fit to be read now?
Do we have the resolution to be read from the podium? Okay,
Auf jeden Fall haben wir diese Resolution entworfen, und wenn Sie damit einverstanden sind, wenn nicht, können Sie es auch noch jetzt ausdrücken.
Anyway, we have this resolution, and if you agree with that, we would like to publish this resolution as the message of this conference, and use it as a greeting to the rallies on August 6th in front of the United Nations and all the other places over the world where this rally for peace will happen because of the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. So I ask you to join our activities, join these, help us build these rallies, help us build this movement, because we need this world global peace movement that stops this development. And perhaps Stephan can read that now. Stoppt die unmittelbare Gefahr eines Atomkriegs. Die versammelten Teilnehmer der Konferenz des Schiller-Instituts in Straßburg am 8. und 9. Juli zur Frage des Krieges in Russland.
To call for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and the opening of negotiations leading to the security interests of all nations in the world. Never has the danger of nuclear war been higher than today. A possible sabotage of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power stations could be used as a trigger to a false flag operation or a pretext for an escalation of the war, crossing the threshold to the use of nuclear weapons. The discussion on the possibility to use nuclear weapons is more and more open in the international news media. Several agreements for a ceasefire were struck on May 2022 between Russia and Ukraine, and it was the NATO powers, none of which is threatened by this war, who pressured Ukraine to pursue the war and promised them all the weapons needed to win the war. US and British officials openly stated that this war should be used to destroy Russia once and for all, despite the terrible amount of casualties for the Ukrainians in particular. In the meantime, the Vatican, China, Brazil, and Africa have all presented peace proposals for a ceasefire and for negotiations aimed at ensuring the security interests of both nations. We, the undersigned, call on all the peace movements worldwide and on all peace-loving forces to demonstrate on August the 6th for an immediate ceasefire and for creating the conditions where never again nuclear weapons will threaten the existence of mankind.
Also wenn jetzt niemand eine Gegenrede dagegen macht, würde ich sagen, wir haben das angenommen und wir sollten alle versuchen, das als Ausgangsbasis zu nehmen.
If nobody has anything to say against this conference, I would say that we conclude that this is accepted by the population and that we should use it as a base to contact as many organizations as possible, everyone in his environment, friends, and to make this movement so strong that it cannot be ignored. Become active for us, study Schiller to improve your soul, which is very important, which is because the soul is the place where good or bad things develop, and I hope we meet soon, very soon.
Sorry, let me make a very last and very short statement. because I didn't have the opportunity to reply to the question. Okay, so the first thing is the question was raised, what should we do? My answer is we should do nothing. We should leave it to human inventiveness and human creativity to improve life on Earth infinitely. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I've heard many times that you have proof that the other side is lying, which is certainly true. But it's better not to say the other side is lying, but to say, I can explain you how it really works, yeah? And this I have tried to do. Okay, thanks for the seconds, yeah?
Thank you. So this concludes. Thank you very much. This concludes our conference, and we all wish you a safe journey home. Thank you very much.